a company I know a lot about. I think I know a lot about. And what do I say about Rashid? He's basically, he's a doctor, he's a professor, he's a hardcore science graduate and scientific guy. He thinks very technical, and he's delved into color management really deep, and he knows his subject very, very well. At the same time, we all know this is a very, very difficult subject, very less understood. I can see from the enthusiasm, number of people here, that we all want to know about color management. And Rashid is also a fantastic professor. He knows how to communicate, and he's tried his level best to simplify this whole thing. So if it goes a little above your head, don't worry. I know it is a little difficult. I still can't understand some parts of what he says. So, but he has tried to bring it down to a very, very basic level. And I hand you over to Rashid. And after that, we have Mustafa from Colors over here, who's a color matching system person who makes the colors, the inks that run your presses. So you have any nice questions for him on matching colors and how it works, it'll be a very interesting seminar. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. So I hand you over to Dr. Rashid Mistry. Thank you, Rashid, for coming.
Thank you.
And I hand you over the mic.
Is this working? Thanks, Ray. I'd like to thank the BMPA for inviting me for this seminar. Yeah. Is it working? It's not working, I think. Okay, I'll speak into the mic here. Everybody can hear me? Yeah. Okay, what I'm going to do is, as Freddie said, I'm trying to keep it at a very basic level. I'm not going to go into any of the dialog boxes of Photoshop or any of the applications. There's so many dialog boxes over there which take you through color management. And if I do that, you'll only be left more confused. What I'm going to do is touch upon the basic concepts, the science upon which the science of color management is based, you know. So that's why I've written, let's get a handle on it, let's try and understand it. Okay? And I'm going to do this with a series of questions, just answering them to give you the perspectives. What is the goal of color management? And the goal of color management is to get devices, to get color from several devices to match visually. And the important thing about this is I'm concentrating on the visual. Okay, what I'm trying to say is, in spite of all the sophistication and the instrumentation we have today, we are the final judge. And we'll see why that is so really. And there are really two schools of thought. There are people who say, no, let the instruments be the final judge. We can, our perception of color can vary depending on how angry you are, what sort of mood you are in, whether you're tired out, things like that. But there is another school of thought which says we are the final judge. There are a few teasers. This is quite a heavy lecture in terms of the scientific this thing. So I've kept teasers in between just to keep you all awake. And each teaser goes with a message. So what can anybody tell me? What do you see here? You'll see a whole lot of black dots appearing within the whites. And the point is, if it's difficult to decide between black and white, you can imagine how difficult it's going to be to try and match colors. And that's just a face of the color management expert. And if you look carefully with your head to the right, you'll see LIAR written across it. And I'm not a color management expert. Okay, but people who try to use color management finally term the color management expert a liar. Okay, does color management really work? That's a very important question. Okay, and you can see two scans over here without any color management, and you can see that there's a difference. Look at the facial tones between the two of them. You know, there's a lot of difference. This is much warmer, darker than the other one. And if you do use color management, oops, sorry, I think I went one step ahead, sorry. That's the one without the color management, that's with the color management. And you can see that they are very close to each other now. Color management cannot give you a 100% result. They will not be identical, but you come very, very close, okay? And the answer to that really is that color management does work, and let's continue with the seminar and see how it works and what is needed for it to make it work. Why is color management so confusing? Why are so many people confused about it? And the reason is that everybody is trying to control the color for you. You have the scanner vendor has their own softwares, the operating systems, the Mac operating system, the Windows operating system have their own color management built in. The software vendors, Adobe, CorelDRAW, everybody have their own color management built in. Including the printer vendor, the RIPs that you get with the printers, all those have color management built in. The important thing to remember today, okay, the first step really is to understand what is color. Okay? And I'm making a statement here, color does not exist in the real world, it exists only as a perception in our brain. And for many of you, it might be difficult to comprehend that because you'll say color, I can see color all around me. What do you mean by it doesn't exist in the real world? Somebody from Xerox might come with a hammer and hit me. So I'll take this concept a little further by an analogy, what I call the pebble stimulus. What happens if I throw a pebble at you? You feel pain, you're perceiving pain. And I think everybody would quickly answer the question, does the pain exist in the real world? Does it exist in the pebble? You'll answer no. It is a sense of perception. Okay? Can you measure the pain? You can't because it's only perceived within you. But you can measure the stimulus. The bigger the stone I throw at you, the more pain you will feel. The faster I throw it at you, the more pain you will feel. Okay? So just as you had the pain stimulus or the pebble stimulus, if you can perceive color, then what is the color stimulus? Okay? What we know in physics, from physics, the color stimulus is nothing but light, which in physics we call it as a electromagnetic spectrum. The spectrum's huge, but it's a small part of the spectrum which we respond to visually, which is somewhere between 380 nanometers to 740 nanometers. And each wavelength of the spectrum has a particular intensity. So what you have over here is happen if I were to unplug the wire, the Y, from the green center of the brain and plug it into your red center. You will start perceiving all the greenery around you as red. So that is what I mean by perception of color. What you have, the original color stimulus, is a complete spectrum, the electromagnetic spectrum, which is continuous. Another important thing about our visual system is, since you're breaking it up into 3 discrete values, okay, there are certain regions which we are not very responsive to. You can see the far red, we are not responsive. We are not responsive to this region. We are not responsive to this. And that will become very important in color management. You'll see as we come along. But just remember, there are certain regions that we cannot respond to very well. In the far red, it has less far red light in it, okay, on that spectrum. We are deficient in sensing the far red. In other words, these two objects, when they are reflecting the light back to you, in the far red region, there may be no sufficient difference for you to perceive the difference. Okay? Yet if I take another light source, which is the 4000K, which has a lot in the far red, okay, the difference that is coming back from these two objects may now be sufficiently different for you to say these colors are now looking different to me. Okay? And this is actually, as I said, because we are breaking this continuous spectrum into 3 values, okay, it is what is normally called a metameric failure of the visual system that causes this problem. Okay? In other words, the light source becomes very important. And actually, the Graphic Arts Technical Foundation has this particular strip which you can buy from them called the GATF strip, and it's written over there, if stripes are seen, light is not 5000K. So you can just, if you're testing a particular light source, you can just put it under that light source, and if it is the correct light source, you will see no stripes. So you can see that over here. You can see slightly blue, more bluish stripes in here and here. And here, when you're usually using the correct light source, you don't see any more stripes. So it's very important. The light source becomes a very important tool in the way we see colors. Okay? The point is, we need to standardize on a light source that we are going to use for matching colors. And before the year 2000, US followed the D50 or the 5000K light source, whereas Europe followed the D65 light source. In other words, we couldn't do color management across the world. And the reason for this is because of the monitors we had in those days, the brightness on the monitors was not sufficient. The way the visual system works is white, when the brightness of that white is less, we perceive it as yellow. And most people complain that when monitors were set to D50, they look too yellow. And we could perceive D65, the monitor set to D65, we felt the human visual system felt that that was white. And that is why Europe stuck to D65, US stuck to D50. In the year 2000, the ISO committee came to a rescue and said D50 will be the viewing standard all over the world. However, they specified that for the general viewing, the monitor brightness must be between 80 to 120 candela per meter square. That's the way intensity of the monitor is measured. You have particular instruments that can measure that for you. And the optimal level would be 100 candela per meter square. And if it's below 80, change your monitor. In the year 2002, they extended this with a new ISO standard for the printing industry and said that D50 was going to be the standard both for viewing on the monitor as well as viewing the prints under a D50 light booth. So it's very important for all printers to have this D50 viewing light booths to see that you're matching colors correctly under the correct light source. Okay, having come to that, just another teaser. Anybody can tell me what they can see here? I usually get very different responses from different people. Somebody says he's playing the saxophone. Some people say he's got a gun in his hand, things like that. Anyway, most people don't see the lady until I put the next eye on. And immediately you see the lady there that he's serenading. And the point over here is a small difference can make a large difference in the color management and the colors that you finally get. Okay, now that we have understood what color is, the next question is how does color management work? And I'm going to use an analogy here again. If you're talking to a French and a German, okay, English is the international language and you would use that as your reference language, otherwise you wouldn't make head or tail of what the German and the French are talking and you'd be left out of the conversation. And you'd use a French dictionary to convert from French to English and a German dictionary to convert back to German. Okay. If you see the way color management works, the structure is very similar to this. Okay. What you have is one device 1, which produces a color. Okay. And you have a profile that describes that device, and it connects to what is called the CIE XYZ color space. Do you remember the XYZ that I said, the outputs from the human eye? That's a simplistic view of it. The XYZ is a far more, it's a mathematical model, okay, built on more complex scientific algorithms. But essentially what you are trying to do is you are trying to define the human's visual color gamut by this color space. It's a mathematical model, and we'll come back to that model later. And what you're doing is you're using that as the reference color space. So you're going from one device to another using 2 dictionaries, just as you had the dictionary here. Instead, the precursor to the profile was called a color rendering dictionary before the ICC profiles came along. And the only difference here is you have an extra module here called the color management module, the CMM. And that's because this whole process is very computationally expensive. And what you have over there is a color calculator doing all these calculations for you, taking the color from one color space into another color space. Let's see how this really works with a few examples, okay? You'll see in many of the softwares, 2 things very often in the dialog boxes. One is to assign an ICC profile, and the second is to convert to an ICC profile. And what is really meant by this? Let's have a look. Okay, I have a CMYK file here with no profile assigned. I've purposely kept it gray with no color there because CMYK is simply a value. Let's say cyan 50. It's simply a value, it has no color to it. An analogy would be a font. Okay, the letter A is simply a ASCII code. It's only when you attach a font to it does it get its appearance. And if I change the font, its appearance will be different. If I have Times Roman or Helvetica or Script, you get different A's to look, the appearance changes. And it's the same way with color management, with color. You very well know that the CMYK file, if printed on different printers, different media, will give you all different colors. So the CMYK does not define the color, it's simply a value. Okay? What you do through this is, the first thing is you assign a profile to this. So you assign the first profile. So let's say this file is meant for the magazine. You're going to print on high quality media, coated paper, and you have assigned the ISO coated profile to it. It is the ISO coated profile now which allows you to convert the CMYK values into a color value and display it to you in color. The reason Photoshop, I forgot to mention one thing, the reason Photoshop will even show you the gray CMYK file really in color on your monitor is because it is using a default profile. Even though no profile is attached, you have your color settings in Photoshop where you can say what are going to be your working spaces, the default working spaces, and it's already using that default working space to show you the color. Okay? Now I've attached a particular profile. Let's see what's going on behind the scenes in Photoshop. If you remember this diagram from the previous slide, what you have is over here the ISO coated profile has been plugged into the CMYK values to convert to the standard human observer. And then Photoshop uses the monitor profile to convert to the monitor RGB and display it to you. So that's what's happening behind the scenes in Photoshop. Photoshop is not touching your file in any way. So when you are assigning a profile, your CMYK values over there are remaining the same. If it's cyan 50, it's going to remain cyan 50. There's no conversion that has occurred. You have simply assigned the profile. Okay? What would happen if I were to print the same file, let's say on newspaper now? Okay? How would it look? You very well know that the newspaper dot gains are different and it's going to look different. So if I attach the newspaper, the SNP profile, the standard newsprint profile to this, Photoshop will be able to now, it uses in this place what previously it was using as the ISO coated, it is now using the SNP profile over here. The rest of it is remaining same. So it's displaying to you again how exactly these CMYK values would look if printed by this process, by the SNP process. Okay. Is this result acceptable on the SNP? The file was originally meant for the magazine print. Okay. Obviously, it's too dark on the SNP. Look at the highlight in the shadows. You have lost it. It can hardly be seen here. Okay. So what you would like to do now really is use color management to convert this file so that it prints correct on the SNP. Okay? You can't do much about the paper color. You can see that the paper here is much darker than the paper on the offset on the magazine print. You can't do much about the paper color, but you can do something about converting it to the second color space. So now what is Photoshop doing? It's taken the CMYK values here, the first values, that is this file here, using the ISO coated profile, convert it to the standard human observer color space, and then use the SNP profile over here to convert the values to a new CMYK. In other words, now you have actually changed the CMYK values in your file so that when it prints, it looks closer to the original CMYK that you had, which was, so now the print on the SNP and the news and the magazine look much closer to each other. You can see the highlight on the shadow. So that's the difference between assigning a profile and converting the profile finally. And behind the scenes, what's happening really in Photoshop or any of the color management softwares that you use. I've spoken a lot about the standard human observer, and we just look at that particular color space, the XYZ color space of the standard human observer. What you see is what we can visually, all the colors that can be seen by the human eye. Okay? And what I've put over here really is two values, A and B, and C and D. The distance between these two is the same. Okay? Remember, this is a mathematical model. We also need to try and use this model to calculate differences between colors. When I'm looking at two different colors, I should be able to use the mathematical model to say, these two colors are this much delta E apart. So much difference is there between the colors. So I should be able to quantitate the difference. Now what happens if I project A and B to you? I purposely offset them so you can see where the two are really. You can hardly see a difference between the two greens. Okay? If A is what you desired and B is what you gave to your client, the client may well accept it. But what about C and D? Remember, they are equidistant. In this color space, The mathematical model will tell you that the colors are equally different from each other. But what happens when I project the C and D? There's a huge difference. In other words, the XYZ, even though it's a mathematical model of the standard human observer, it is not describing the human observer the way we see color. As I said, we are the final judge, and no client is going to accept that. Okay? In other words, the XYZ color space is not visually linear. It doesn't work the way we see things. And we need to convert this. If we are going to use mathematical models to really quantitate the difference between colors, we need to convert the XYZ color space to a more visually linear color space. And several transformations from the XYZ color space have been done by the CIE, and the most important or the most widely used is the lab color space. So let's get a little understanding of what the lab color space really is. Okay? It's broken up into two entities here. One is the L, the luminosity, and the other A and B is the chromacity. Okay? L, the luminosity is going through the center of the chromacity wheel, and it just makes all the colors lighter or darker. And the color wheel which you see here in the center is neutral. Okay? If I were to raise the whole wheel up towards L, you'll get all the colors becoming lighter. If I were to lower it, all the colors would become darker. A, in the center, the values are 0, 0. If you go negative, you have green. If you go positive, you have magenta. Whereas on the B axis, if you go negative, you have blue, and on the positive, you have yellow. Okay? On the periphery, you have the most vibrant or the most saturated colors. So that's your lab color space, and this is a visually linear color space. Not completely, I will not say 100% visually linear, but much closer to the way we respond to colors. Okay, now that you learned about luminosity and chromacity from the lab color space, which do you all think is more important as far as color management is concerned, luminosity or chromacity? How many people feel luminosity may be more important? Hands up. Nobody? Everybody feels chromacity is important. Yeah, because that's the one on the color wheel which is showing you color. Okay, just a little teaser. Can anybody read out the colors? Anybody read out the colors? Yellow, blue, orange, black, red? No, that's not the color. The color is green, red, blue, yellow, blue. You can't read it easily. So your brain is insisting to read the word rather than the color. So sometimes color is not as important as you think it is. And let's go through a small experiment which I've done. Okay, here you have, there are 9 squares. It's a 3 by 3 grid. Okay, and I've kept luminosity same throughout, but the chromacity between any two adjacent colors, there's a difference of 4%. Okay, and you can hardly see a difference. If I did the same experiment with luminosity, keeping chromacity same throughout, and a difference between adjacent squares of 4% in luminosity, you see a difference. Okay, and luminosity may well be more important than in the way we see colors for color matching. Okay, and if you, going from this, when we are doing any color correction, the first thing we do to an image is really get its tonal range correct, the blacks and the whites, right? That's what we work on first before we start working on color. And that's because the tonal range is the most important. So remember, luminosity is more important than chromacity where color management is concerned as far as our visual system is concerned. Okay. Where does color management excel? This is another thing which we need to know because our visual systems are very, very complex. We are all the time trying to, as I said, we are the final judge. And we must understand where we can use color management effectively and where we need to make our own judgments stand in priority to that of the instrumentation that we have. And from the lab color space, this is just the AB diagram, the chromacity diagram, a section to the lab color space where you have the maximum saturation of colors. And you have what you see, the periphery, the full diagram over here is again the visual color space. And within that you see 2 different color spaces of 2 different printers. One is the HP inkjet printer and the other is a flatbed proof, or let's say an offset proof. Yeah, it's called the color gamut. what the device can produce for you. Okay? And you can see that the offset is a much smaller gamut than the HP. Okay? Can I reproduce the colors which are outside on to the offset? I cannot. Okay? Whatever amount, because it is outside the offset gamut. There's nothing you can do. You are working with a particular set of inks which have a particular chromacity, and there's nothing you can do to achieve the colors which are outside the gamut. And no amount of color management can really help you do that. It's just not possible. Okay? However, if you are trying to reproduce the offset press on, let's say, the HP printer, in other words, you're trying to do a proofing. You want to see how a particular file is going to come out on the offset press by proofing on your HP printer. That is very well possible because the gamut of the HP printer is circumventing the complete gamut of the offset press. So it should be easy to get the colors to be accurately proofed on the HP printer. So that's what I've summarized here, that when the source color, what you're trying to reproduce, is within the gamut of the target color space, the HP printer, for example, then color management can definitely give you a direct hit and can be very accurate for you to use. But in the reverse direction, it has been left open by the commission as to how best to manage the color. And we'll come to that as well later. I haven't shown the Xerox printer over there. Okay, I think I'll just, something about simultaneous contrast, but maybe I'll straight away go to something more dramatic. Okay. As I said, our visual systems are very complex. Okay? We see colors with respect to other colors surrounding them, which is what is called simultaneous contrast. Okay? And I challenge anybody's visual system. This is a grid, black and white checkerboard, and B is a white and A is a black. Okay? I challenge anybody's visual system to tell me that these two actually are the same. A and B are the same. Anybody can tell me over there that A and B are the same? Anybody's visual system that allows you to say A and B is same? Any hands up? Okay. Let's have a look. I'm going to take this color, and a little difficult without the mouse, but drag it over A. It's the same as A, and it is the same as B. Shocking? At least these two colors were quite far apart. What about C, which is again a black square, and the small strip of D here, which is again a white square? How many would say those two are same? Anybody? I'll take that same strip. It's the same. C is again the same. And you can see it disappear inside D as well. It's the same. So we see colors with respect to other colors surrounding them, as I said. And the moment I remove the surround, you will realize that your visual systems are no longer fooled, and this really is the same. Everybody agree now that all four colors are the same? So this is how your visual system works. You're matching colors. When you're matching, there's a particular way of matching. Always overlap the colors that you're matching, because otherwise colors surrounding them, if you have two proofs, you're trying to match them and they are apart in all that you'll use, you will see 4 rendering intents which have been given by the CIE. The colorimetric rendering intents, so there are 2, absolute and relative, and then you have the perceptual and the saturation. And the question is, which to use when? What does each one do and when best to use it? Okay? So let's try and understand each of these rendering intents, because they're very important when you are doing color conversions. Let's try and understand first the colorimetric rendering intents. I'll just take an analogy here again. Which keeps better time? A watch which is not working properly, going slow, or one which has stopped working? stop working because it at least gives you the correct time twice a day. Okay? And that is the analogy that the colorimetric rendering intent uses. It says, if I can reproduce a color correctly, let me do so. Those which are outside the gamut, I can't reproduce anyway, I'll throw them away. Okay? So that's the analogy it goes with. Now, if I were to draw a straight line going from the bigger gamut through the smaller gamut to the point 0 in the center, okay, you can see that these colors are outside the gamut, and these two which are in yellow can be reproduced correctly on the offset press. So what it does is, the ones which are outside will all get compressed. Not that they are really thrown away, but all of these will get compressed, you will see, to a single color on the periphery of the offset press. So that's what happens. So all the colors which are outside the gamut come to lie on the periphery of the gamut of the offset press. And that is what colorimetric rendering intent will do. When do we use this? We actually use it. It is best used in the reverse direction. You want to try and proof a result of the offset press. It's going to your CMYK file from the pre-press house is going to go to the press, and you'd like to see how it's going to appear on the press. You have in your pre-press house or in your office digital printers which are capable of producing much larger gamuts. So you proof on that. Okay, so you're converting from the smaller color space to the larger color space using colorimetric, because you want accuracy. Colorimetric rendering intents give you accuracy. So you will mainly use these intents for proofing. What is the difference between absolute and relative? You're printing on different papers, maybe a newsprint, maybe the different qualities of papers. The purpose of absolute colorimetric when you're doing this conversion is to also simulate the paper color that you're going to print on. If it's the Economic Times, it's the pinkish colored paper that you're going to finally be printing on. It'll actually, it's like laying down the color. You may not get the texture and the feel of the paper, but it lays down the color of the paper and then prints your image on top of it. It's equivalent to that. Okay, so that is where absolute colorimetric is used, if you even want to proof with the paper color. Coming to the perceptual rendering intent. What perceptual does is, you again want to go from the larger gamut to the smaller one. What it does is, it's like a rubber band. The single line is like a rubber band. The whole thing compresses to the smaller gamut. Okay? The single line is like a rubber band, the whole thing is like a rubber sheet. And you'll see how the whole thing compresses. So what you had on the periphery over here lies on the periphery here. But what you had, the yellow dot inside, has come to lie here now. So it is not accurate, but it preserves the relationship between colors. Okay? And that is why it's called the perceptual. It's the way we perceive. We perceive colors, as I told you, using the simultaneous contrast experiment, okay, as with colors surrounding them. We always perceive colors with respect to each other. So this is called the perceptual rendering intent. It preserves the relationship between colors. It is not, the purpose is not accuracy, but to allow you to perceive the same way as you would have in the larger gamut. And it is best used for converting images when you're going from the RGB color space, a larger color space, to the smaller one. Okay? It is best used for perceptual rendering intent. Even if you're going from CMYK, let's say the magazine color space, to a newsprint color space, the newsprint color space is smaller than the magazine color space. And you have a file which is meant for the magazine, you want to repurpose it for the newsprint, again use perceptual, because you're going from a larger color space to a smaller one. Where would you use the saturation rendering intent? That's the last one, okay? What happens is, when you're using the perceptual, as I said, everything is compressing towards the center. The center, remember I told you, is neutral. It's the gray value. In other words, you're also desaturating when you're doing this conversion, okay? And there are certain graphics which you may not want to really desaturate. So what it does, the saturation rendering intent, apart from compressing from the periphery, it also decompresses from the center. So the final values do not move that much towards the centers. You maintain some level of saturation. And this is best used for business graphics. In your annual reports, you have pie charts, bar diagrams, which are just flat, vibrant colors that you want. And it is best used for those type of graphics. So this is where different rendering intents would be used. You can see the results here of using these intents. This is the Adobe RGB color space. You can see the different colors, how they are blending from one to the other, the different gradients. What you are seeing here, little in gray, is what are colors which are out of gamut of the offset press. Okay? And you can see using the colorimetric rendering intents that these regions have sort of got flattened. The difference that you see, the gradients, you can actually, this sort of outline which is there over here, you can actually trace that outline here as well. The colors have got flattened. In the perceptual rendering intent, the gradients have been maintained. Look at it here, look at it here. It's flattened here, it's maintained here. And again, the saturation, you'll see a little more saturation in this region. It's a little more difficult on these screens, but you can see it more easily on a computer screen. The difference, as I said, between absolute and relative is Adobe RGB has a white point of D65. In other words, it's bluish white point. And that white point is being reproduced when using absolute colorimetric. You can see it as bluish. Whereas with relative, it will remain white. So that's the difference between the absolute and relative, perceptual and saturation. Anybody can see? That's the last teaser. No? Can't? It's a Dalmatian. Okay. That's it. Thank you. I'll give it over to Mustafa to continue and show how his
Hello. 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 Can you hear me? No.
this doesn't work.
Thank you.
I think so.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Rashid, thank you very much. I think we'll take lots of question answers. And if there are no question answers, he's going to ask you the questions. Mustafa, thank you very much. Mustafa is going to extend his talk, take it further to where color management is used in printing, about ordering inks and its problems, its solutions, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of answers, questions over there too. Thank you, Mustafa.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank BMPA, Mr. Fred Poonawalla and Mr. Rashid for incorporating me in this seminar. I was late for this thing, but they were kind enough to incorporate me. Thank you. Mr. Rashid has, I compliment him, he has simplified the most complex problem that I know of color management in a very nice way, a beautiful seminar. And he saved me a lot of time. So I won't be speaking on color management, but the application of color management to what we called as matching. I have two matching centers. One is Colors and one is Inkman. One is in Bombay, one is in New Bombay. And we do a lot of color management over there. So I will try and do justice to Mr. Rashid's seminar presentation with my application. How do we match spot colors on different substrates and everything? Just to summarize, that color remains, why do we need to, what is the need to quantify color? Why do we need to give it a value? The reason is that it remains in the mind of the observer for a very short time. Color means a different sensation to everyone. Each individual person has a different sensation of color, as Mr. Rashid said before. And color cannot be expressed or described explicitly. We all know there are hundreds of shades of blue. So over a phone, if someone says, I want a blue color, we need to know what blue he needs. You know, it's either royal blue or cyan, it's a greenish blue, it's a reddish blue. There are hundreds of blues over here, or maybe 1,000. What color quantification does, or color management does, is it avoids miscommunication between the print buyers, the printers, and the ink suppliers. We need to stand today on a one single platform and say, this is the color that I need. If a print buyer needs one particular color, even the printer should be able to replicate it, and they will come to the let's say, an ink manufacturer or a matching center, and we should be able to give them the same color. You know, it should not change. It should not happen that the print buyer says, okay, I want this color, and after printing, it comes out to be a bit different, and he's not happy with it. So we need to stand on one platform. That can happen only when we quantify a color. We give a value to a color. So if your print buyer talks about value, like a LAB value to a particular color, that thing is taken over by the printer and it is communicated to the matching center, and we also try and give the same thing. So we all stand on one platform. It helps in controlling color. In the end, it helps in maintaining consistency in production and minimizing batch to batch variation. And technology is available to measure and compare colors. Let's see what are the requirements for matching a spot color or a particular Pantone shade or any other master or a reference which is given by the print buyer. We need a spectrophotometer. We need ink formulation software which can formulate your recipe based on that particular shade. We need accurate and precise database of the ink, and we need the ink concentrates. This whole thing is fed into a computer, and what we get, I'll just show you the procedures, right? How do we do the matching at our end? A person walks in with a color reference, any color reference, and a substrate. The reference is first scanned with a spectrophotometer. You can use any spectrophotometer. It's not limited to a particular one, because nowadays a lot of spectrophotometers are available, and the database is also available on those spectrophotometers. The substrate needs to be specified. I would like to emphasize over here that a substrate is a very important part of matching. If your substrate changes, your color will change, and relatedly everything will change accordingly. So a substrate is very important. I'll show a statistics that I've taken afterwards, how important the substrate is. The substrate is specified, and based on the substrate, a recipe is given, which will, we prepare the recipe, take a print again and again, put it under the spectrophotometer and try and match it with the reference. If the references matches, it gives a value below, let's say delta E below 1 for CMC 2:1. A report is printed, and those specs, those formulations of a required quantity is sent to the mini plant of the ATM, and the specified color and the quantity is prepared. This whole process ideally should take around 45 minutes. But sometimes what happens, the inputs are not there from the printers, or because of some miscommunication, it takes a longer time. Like there has to be a lamination or a matte lamination or varnish, and we sometimes don't know what is the end result, what is the post-press detail. So sometimes it takes some time. But ideally, it should be 45 minutes. This matching center is available with microinks. They have a beautiful setup, and you can contact microinks for the whole thing. This is just an example of what we do. This is my reference, Pantone 072C, and this is what I matched using this spectrophotometer, this technology. And my spectrophotometer conditions are this. These are a bit different. For this particular project, I had taken the spectrophotometer reading, and these can be changed to suit any conditions, any country's conditions. Like ISO standards now are D50. We can use that also. But some places they specify, a client will specify that no, I need on these conditions also of spectrophotometer. These can be changed accordingly. This is the report that is printed out. It's a GRATAG report, and you see over here you get all the values. You get the values of the reference, the values of the masters, and you get a delta E over here, along with the conditions which are on the top. The third line over there, it specifies the conditions, which is very important. If the condition changes, your delta E value changes. Like if you measure at a particular conditions and you are doing the matching at one conditions and giving it to your client, and if the client measures it at a different conditions, the values will be different. Your delta E might go above 2, which is not acceptable. So the care has to be taken to match those conditions. And I'll just give you the details of my what I got, the values over there. So here I would like to specify that the ink GSM, which is on the paper, also plays an important role in defining the values of LABCH. If your ink GSM, or let's say their density as we call it, changes, your values will also change. This is my delta E values that I took, and this is for the LAB. Delta E LAB I got as 0.88, which is pretty close to the master. Let's see what are the printer's expectation from matching point of view, from spot color point of view. Printers would like to get accurate color matching. The reproduction of the shade throughout the stock should be same. This is especially for the packaging clients. They would like that in a stock the shade that is been defined should be same. It should give good mileage, obviously, good gloss, and good rub and drying properties. There are many factors which affect the reproduction of color on a paper, but I would just like to, since I have very less time, I'll just speak on two of them, that is paper and density, and then we close this topic. As I mentioned before, the substrate plays a very important role in matching, especially spot colors. Change in stock would change the LABCH value of the paper. If you change the stock, today you have one stock, and maybe a month later you have to print the same job and you get a different stock of paper, but you order for the same ink, the result might be different from what you got previously. Because here we need to take into account the LABCH value of the paper, the yellowness or the blueness of the paper, depending on the type of the paper. I did an experiment, the blue color that I showed earlier, I measured on one paper, that was this one. My LABCH values of the paper are this, Then I took there was another paper, and I took the LABCH value of that paper. They are different, they look visually the same, but actually they are different. If you measure with a spectrophotometer, you can see the difference. They are really different. And the result that I got was for the blue color, my earlier delta E LAB value was 0.88. And for the new stock, unfortunately it came to 1.16, which was not acceptable to the client. He wanted it below 1. So you see a slight difference in the paper might just change the LAB values and your delta E value. What counts in the end that your reference, the batch that you have printed should match with the reference values. So if there is any such problem, you can give a call to your ink manufacturer or your matching center and just tell them that, hey, I have received a new stock of paper. I want the same readings on this paper now. That's the simplest way. Because once it's printed, you cannot change the thing. Something like that. Second thing I would like to say that on the ink GSM, I have done some experiments on that. And these are my readings for it, that I changed the thickness ink release on the paper. For different thickness, I took the readings. And I found that for the normal one, which was 1.25, which is a standard ink GSM, should be on the art paper, it was delta E LAB was 0.88 as I matched. And then I changed my thickness upwards and downwards. And it showed a difference. You can see the difference, it's huge over there. For 1.52 it went up to 1.38 and 1.75 it went to 1.78, which was not acceptable. So if you take the current standards, ISO standards, and if you take your comparison method as CMC, it should be below 1. So if you release it more or less, depending on the job, it might come out to be different. So what actually needed here is that we need to communicate with each other. The printer has to communicate with the ink matcher or the ink manufacturer and say, my job is this, there is reverse in the job, so please make the ink strong. So he will adjust it according to it. Because once the ink is made, it's very difficult to change the ink. It's very, and if the matcher does not know whether there is a screen or a reverse or what is going to happen with the job, post-printing details, it's very difficult to match the ink and give. And we can just, sometimes I just hope that the ink works, that's it. In spite of not knowing what's going to be happening, sometimes it's a science, I would say. It's no longer an art as we have been talking about. It's a science and we need to communicate. There is a need of communication today to specify that what type of ink you need. It's, as we said, as the person from Xerox said, it's a personal thing. We need to personalize our requirements. You need to tell me that this is the job, I have a Pantone color, I have screen, I have reverse in it, so please make the ink accordingly. I have 4 ups, 3 ups, it's a full pata job, something like that. And hence, or it's not only me, it's anyone, any ink matcher will be able to help you out with that. And that's what I wanted to say in the stipulated time. So thank you very much, and I open this session for question and answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mustafa. Rashid, can we have you on the line of fire? And Mustafa too. Are there any questions? I have one question. How do you measure ink film thickness on a printing press? How does the printer measure ink film thickness?
Okay, and the profile structure, the internal structure of the profile, the loots that are written into the profile and all have been defined by the ICC. Okay. Now the ISO, the International Standard Organization, that's what it stands for. And they have laid down certain criteria for the offset press, you know, the dot gains that you have to follow, the densities you have to follow. So those are the ISO standards. And the ISO committee has made a ICC profile for those conditions. And that's called the ISO coated profile.
Basically, for an offset printer, it's better to talk about ISO rather than talking ICC because that's
because then you're following international standards.
because they've already incorporated ICC in ISO.
Yeah,
That is what you're trying
yeah,
to say.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
My question is for Mustafa. When you give a drawdown that you've matched the ink on all the parameters which you asked for, we gave it to you, but that drawdown is a waterless process. And then we're using a process which has water in it. So then is there a difference? There is a difference, I know there is. But then how do we control that?
There is definitely a difference, water adding with ink, it will tone down the ink. So you need to release it a bit more at that time. So 1.25, what I said was the standard after taking water into consideration, I think. So see, it's the density which counts. We try and match it as there is a particular density defined that it should be 1.25 ink GSM should be released on the art paper, which is standard.
But is there any proofing system at your end which incorporates water in it?
No, not till. I'm sorry. You have a proofing system which is called IGT proofer, which we have, but it's not on these lines. It's also a dry, this thing, not a water, one with water.
Do you also consider the speed of the machine? Does that matter?
Yeah, it definitely matters.
So then when somebody is giving you specifications, does he also need to specify that the job is going to print at a particular speed?
Yeah, he needs to specify firstly whether it's a web offset or offset ink, because both of them, they have different varnish systems and different raw materials. And whatever ink we try to make should run on each and every machine. It's a standard formulation given by Micro Inks, which works very well. But I would appreciate if people give me feedback on what machine they are running. It does make a difference.
So why can't you give us a form that gives us all the questions that you have to ask, so that we are enlightened and we can send you that information? I mean, if you can send us that, then we can tell you, okay, this is the criteria, this is the paper, this is the run, this is the light fastness. All these things are sort of standard.
Great.
So can you send us a form through the BMPA maybe?
Okay, fine. I'll do that.
That'll be
Very
fantastic.
nice suggestion by Mr. Fred
Mustafa,
Poonawala.
one more question. Does the temperature of the ink itself play a role? If the press is running for a very long time and the ink has got heated up?
It does play. It becomes a bit smooth. The tech goes down a little bit.
I have a question, sorry. A lot of customers, international customers, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, all the international customers, they specify a certain shade. And they say that this shade is the acceptable shade, but we have a variation. We can accept this much darker and this much lighter,
Right.
which is acceptable limits of this particular run that is acceptable. Otherwise, everything else will get rejected. So they actually give you drawdowns of these colors. So can you also give us a delta E shade difference between the lightest, the correct, and the darkest tolerance if we specified it to you?
Yeah, we can do that for you. We can do that.
Dr. Mustri, I have a question for you. We spoke about the gamut of color between an HP printer, that's what we are talking about, digital. You just specified HP, but we are talking about digital and offset. Now, we had the Xerox session earlier when they said that if you print something on digital, it will be very close to what you can print on offset. But your diagram didn't show that. You said that there were certain colors which are beyond the gamut of offset. So does that mean that our digital presses have to be brought within the profile of the offset to be able to achieve that, or?
What you are doing when you are printing on a printer, on the digital printer, which has a larger gamut, you are actually bringing the gamut of that down. Okay, you're restricting its gamut really to that of the offset press.
Okay. So that's possible to do.
Iqbal, can I answer that?
Yes.
If you are trying to match the offset standard it can be done because from a wider you can go to a narrow.
It can't
But
be.
if it's a job which is only for digital, just imagine if you wanted the full scope of the color, you'd get a job that looks more brilliant and better looking than an offset would ever do. So it depends on what you need. If it's a job that you're going to say 100 copies today on digital and 5,000 tomorrow on offset of the same job, you want them both looking the same. Or if I'm using it for proofing, you'll want them both looking the same. But if it's a job that needs only digital, why not use the whole gamut and have a more colorful job?
But imagine using stochastic screens, imagine using hexachrome colors. Would you be able to close that gap between digital and offset or no?
If it's wider, why do you want to close it?
No. Can I go to the digital range? Can I increase the gamut of offset by using additional
Of
colors?
course, offset colors, when you use special colors on a press, on a 6-color press, you're able to widen the gamut and have a much wider gamut. Then again, you have to use color management to make full use of that gamut. So that's
And
the
one-
thing.
one
I
more
think
question, Dr. Mr.
Kiran has a good question.
If you talk about the 6-color offset, it will still never come very close to 6-color digital.
That's right.
You know, you will compare 6 against 6.
No, it won't be the same. I mean, there'll always be differences in the two, and maybe the inkjet will still be wider. Correct? Is
And
that what
Dr.
you're saying?
Mistry, just one more question. You spoke about squares. You put those squares on the screen to show that when you remove the irrelevant parts of the square, then you're able to see the similar colors. So we could do the same on our offset. For example, if you want to match a sample along with what is printed, we could have these squares cut out. But then does that base have to have a neutral color, or does it have to be white or black or
The
what in order
background.
to be matched? Okay.
Background could be black or gray, neutral gray.
Yeah, I have a question. You showed that color gamut for offset, like we have to compress it within a circle. So, but if you go from a CMYK to a 6-color hexachrome, can we expand the gamut further to get more closer to the outside of the gamut and get more colors inside?
You can't expand if you're going from a smaller gamut onto a device which can print more. And you already have your file restricted to the smaller gamut, the CMYK, which is meant for the press.
Okay.
If the CMYK is already meant for the press, you have lost the larger gamut. Suppose you had originally an RGB file, okay, which was larger gamut. You have already converted it to CMYK for the press. You have lost all that extra
but if
color
I-
that you have. The best you can do, even if you use a perceptual or saturation rendering intent, it does give you a little more saturation when you're going back to the larger gamut. Okay,
that
but you can never get back to the complete gamut.
Because with CMYK, you have a restriction that you can't go beyond a particular gamut. But if you use a hexachrome where you add additional 2 colors, can you expand the gamut further by
I think so.
prepress?
Yeah, but you need to repurpose that file either
Yeah.
manually by
Yeah.
actually taking some, suppose you are using a special green.
Or screen or ornament?
No, I think there are softwares that actually do that and
Yeah.
extend the gamut for you.
So you can get
There
a
are-
more,
You
better,
can get
better,
wider colors. if
wider
you-
colors
it's
in
like,
the gamut.
It's like printing with a CMYK file with your normal inks. And then you have a set of inks which have got very high saturation. You're going to get a bigger gamut anyway. So similar to that analogy, if you could control that, the software I think can go there.
Another question I have is that delta E less than 2. I have seen in experience that there are certain shades, although the delta E shows less than 2, visually does not match.
No, that's true.
So then in that case, whether you go, because what the printer sees first is visually. Measurements come afterwards. So what is more important? You go either visually or by delta E.
As I said, we are the final judge. Okay, visually is more important. It is true that, especially our eyes are very sensitive to the gray, to the center of that chromacity wheel. Okay. And if you calculate the delta E, which is in the lab color space, okay, then the delta E is uniform throughout that color space, but our visual system is not so.
Okay.
If you're looking at colors which are very saturated, then you may not see a visual difference. If you're looking close to the grays, then that delta E, even of 1, you can still see a difference, visual difference. And that is why there are newer standards that have come out after the delta E, which are the CMC standards, which allow a more visually linear color space is what it represents. So if you are looking at a delta E of less than 1, then it will be visually also not visible.
So in that case, where do you go visually only? So always delta E, should not go by delta E.
Delta E is not all that stringent. The CMC is.
Again, one more experience what I faced is that not many people in the industry, as far as customers are concerned, they know delta E should be less than 2. There are certain shades where I suppose match a delta E, I use LAB, I get say delta E 3. The moment I switch from delta E LAB to CMC, it becomes half, 1.5.
Correct.
So if
That's
I
why I'm
use
saying
that for the same, it passes. If I use CMC
No,
against, say,
it doesn't
LAB.
pass. What is 2 for the lab, for the delta E, is less than 1 for CMC.
For
So if
CMC,
it doesn't
right.
pass in the lab, it won't pass. You're trying to keep the same restraint, 2 only for the lab, CMC. It's not so.
No, suppose you say I want delta E less than 2.
Correct.
Okay.
Under
With LAB,
CMC,
I'm
it has to
getting.
be less than 1 then.
No, suppose I have a question that the customer says I want delta E less than 2. Suppose I match by using the LAB system, I get 3. So it's not acceptable. I just switch over the mode to CMC, I get 1.5, which is acceptable, which is
But
again less
that's
than
what
2.
I'm saying, 1.5 is not acceptable under CMC's conditions.
Okay.
Under
It should be
CMC,
less
it should
than
be
1.
less than 1.
Okay.
So the conditions change.
Kiran?
And just
Kiran?
one last question, small one.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Give him a mic. Give him the mic, please.
When you talk about
That's
delta
Kiran,
E,
sorry, that's Kiran Prayagi, another expert on color management. He's spoken at many seminars and he's an authority on this subject. So Kiran, please stand
Yeah.
up so everyone can
No,
have the benefit of
what I
seeing.
say is when you talk about delta E, unfortunately nobody specifies what formula of delta E. There are 5 different formulas. And which formula you use, the delta E depends on that. So every time when you talk to the ink manufacturer or anybody, you have to say you want delta E 76, 94, 2000, CMC 1:1, 2:1, and then say what delta E, should be applied. That's very important.
Mike,
Yeah, there are 5 different formulas. Sorry?
give him the mic. Please use the mic.
Yeah. No, what is different formulas have come for?
No, we have seen basically Mustafa said ki film thickness in offset printing it should be around 1.75. One person asked me that one question that how one the ink goes to the press, water comes in the ink. How we take care of it? Basically, the film thickness which we match, we try to correlate the film thickness of the printers. How we do that? We try to get the ink little more stronger. Because we know around 30% ink, what has to be incorporated into ink while printing. So film thickness is taken more. I mean, the ink is going to be lighter when they print it. Now, as you said, how film thickness control is very difficult. Now, Mr. Punawala told that why can't you give the print a medium, what you call the 3 different prints, standard print, lighter and darker. In this case, delta will be a hell of a difference.
Yes.
If you say the standard print matched by Mustafa in ATM center is less than 2, if it goes to the higher relatively 4 to 5, it fell. So till today in India, it's normally like that. Now density is only for CYMK, not for special color. Special color density, that's why spectrometer is there. What I told Mustafa, and we go for density. Density is only for CYMK.
No, even the density also, it depends what densimeter you have.
Yeah.
You have used a narrow band
You're
printer, you use
specified,
broadband,
yes.
you have polarized, non-polarized, everything comes in.
Yes, you're specific.
But about this delta E, see why these different formulas are there. 76, what you see
Right.
and you measure, visually it shows the difference. So they came up with 94 formula, which closes the difference.
Right.
Then it comes 2000 and then CMC 1 and 2:1. So we have some customers, from US and all that, they specify what delta E and what formula should be used. And then everyone has to work accordingly. So that's very important to say what formula.
So in film thickness plays a very important role. Now,
Yeah, film thickness, yes,
How,
of course.
how the
Yeah.
ATM can take care of film thickness? Now it depends upon the ink transfer. Now nobody in ATM center can measure film thickness. That's my perception. Because ultimately IGT printer will tester, you take the ink, print it, transfer it. How much ink is transferred from IGT to the print is more important. So ultimately we believe that when ink manufactures, film thickness is 1.5, 1.75, it may not be. So ultimately, judgment of the printers while putting onto the press that they have to release little less or more ink. That's what we used to do informally. We give the 3 prints.
So
Lighter-
color, the eye is very
Using spectrometer, they used to refer this L. L stand for density along with your release of ink. Okay, this is the first thing I think somebody asked this question. How you maintain your density? You have to maintain L part. L stand for release along with your density. It is the answer for that thing.
okay.
I have a question for you. In screen printing, say job more than 4 colors, say 6 color job, can it be converted to 4 color CMYK by using process colorings?
Yeah, if you can, in the screen printing, to actually measure a target chart with the 6 colors, okay, and make a profile for it, you can always then convert from one profile to another.
But your screen printing inks are likely to have more saturation, more gamut, and what is possible using offsets. You have to be really careful there.
Yeah, the question is whether it can really replace the
No, it
original.
It will not replace
It will not.
special colours.
If the gamut is larger, you cannot replace it.
Cannot replace.
Simple.
I have one question for Mustafa. So in the matching center, you said that you make the ink in 45 minutes, maximum time, using the software and density. You can match.
Ideal time. I would
Okay,
say,
ideal time. Say, I said 2 hours, not even 45 minutes. You match the ink. See, the densitometer or the spectrophotometer cannot take into account the porosity of the paper. It might check the LAB, CH values, but it can't check the porosity of the paper, which plays a very big role in affecting your delta E values. Okay? Suppose you match something. The first thing what you do in the matching center is you put it and check the delta E. The ink is in a wet condition.
Right.
After the ink dries, after half an hour, 1 hour, the delta E values do change. How do you control that?
Well, you measure it after 1 hour and see.
Hmm?
That's what I do.
Right.
I do it after 1 hour.
I think
I tell to the client that I cannot give you in 45
Does the ink dry in 1 hour?
Yeah?
Does the ink dry fully in 1 hour?
Yeah, it does.
You have to
a special
measure.
heater.
I think there's a question there. You have to see how much the ink is drifting after monitor for a full 24 hours.
Yeah.
Then you know which point of time to measure your ink. And then you do your matching system. I think Rashid can throw some light on how we do it on
Because you
inkjet.
can't wait for 24 hours. No, if you have to give the ink in 2 hours. After
Yeah, but
checking
then
everything.
those are the limitations of the process. I mean, if that time is required and there's a drift in ink, like in inkjet, on certain inkjet printers, the ink changes over a 24-hour period. On certain inkjet printers, it's more stable after 1 hour. So you have to understand what process you're using, what inks you're using, and what is the shift based on your research.
I have one more experience. There are certain shades which cannot be matched with a color computer by using the software.
Like metallic colors?
Might be light tint colors. You just can't match by. Means I've experienced that. Is it true?
Extremely light colors.
Yes.
become
Very
difficult
tint
to-
colors.
Very faint, very pastel colors become
Yeah.
difficult because you're working close to the paper white then.
Yeah.
And if your paper whites are different,
Because I've experienced. We
it's
have
very difficult to match.
couldn't match the shade in 24 hours. We have to go manual. Is it possible?
And that's what I'm saying, that if you're looking at pastels,
Pastel colors.
it's
Yeah.
the paper white which becomes important over there.
Right.
If I'm trying to match let's say a 5% cyan on a newsprint against a magazine print, it's actually one is outside the
No,
gamut
not
of
way.
the other.
If I match a coated Pantone shade on a coated paper, say light tint shade,
Yeah.
I'm not able to match by using the color software.
You will not be able to because I'm saying one is outside the gamut of the other.
Okay, so in that you'd go manual. That is best.
You'll have to try and see. The color management will tell you what is the best, closest option you can come to, but you'll never get the match.
Okay.
I have a question. We all the Pantone colors, we see that it's got a pre-designated LAB value or an LCH value.
Yes.
A lot of times we have clients who specify a Pantone color. They don't specify LAB. Supposing a client does not specify the spectrophotometrical measuring settings, like the Illumin D65 or D50 or the degrees, does the spectrophotometrical settings affect the basic LAB value? Let's say if I am saying that Pantone 486 and with a setting of D65, the LAB is this. So is the setting also affecting the LAB perception of that color?
It has to be under D50 because if you measure under D65, the LAB value will change.
So is Pantone, when they're specifying an LAB, are they doing it on a particular spectrophotometrical settings? Like when we say Pantone, if I take my extra spectrophotometer, they have an LAB value in it. So is it for a particular setting which is there, and as I change the setting from D50 to D65 or the degrees, the LAB will change?
Will change, yeah. Even if you are using the 2-degree observer and the 10-degree observer, the values change. You change the lighting condition, the values change. But the Pantone, library comes with the LAB values given by Pantone itself. So if you open any of the Pantone libraries in Photoshop or this thing, you'll see the lab values. You don't even need to actually measure the Pantone shade. The lab values are specified along with the Pantone shade for you. And you simply use that to convert to the color space that you need.
Okay.
Okay, now I think we are getting to the end. I think we have one young lady here who has a question. Last one, ladies first, but now this one will be ladies last. 1 minute. Just wait for the mic, please. Thank you.
My question is for Mr. Prayagi.
Come out with the new formulas to plot it on the diagram exactly the way human brain, perceives it. So that's why these different formulas are coming. So there are some, big departmental stores like Walmart or Target, they specify what formula you should use. Whether you should use 2:1 or you should use 2000 or 94. ISO specifies 94. It's CI 94. It depends on ultimate customer.
Can we do this later?
It depends on ultimate customer.
Anybody hungry? Hands up. Yeah? Hungry for knowledge or hungry for lunch? We'll cut short
So
this
just a
seminar.
final answer to this. What formula you use.
There's no final answer.
It depends on the ultimate customer. For example, what Walmart says, use this, you have to use that.
Right.
What Target says, use this, you have to use that.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rashid. Thank you, Mustafa. Just a minute, please. Just a minute. I'd like Fahim to give a memento to Dr. Rashid Mistry on behalf of the association, and thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. For all those who have not understood the presentation, they can stay back, and those who have understood it can go for lunch. Rashid, thank you very much. Give him a big hand, please. And may I request Iqbal Kiradawala to give a token of appreciation to Mustafa for a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Mustafa. Clap, clap, clap. Thank you. And please join us for lunch. And please be back in 45 minutes because we have the next session going. So please come back on time. Thank you very much.